Thanks to Greg, and every time that we get together, it seems like I always have to remind him that he talks about our acronyms and our agency names and everything, and those of you who don't know how Canada got its name, they argued mightily over what the country's name would be, and finally they said they'll throw the letters of the alphabet in a hat and draw them out, and they did, and they went C-A-N-A-D-A, so there it is. For those of you who are having a hard time spelling, I'll draw it out later. Our next speaker is Bud Cribley, who is the Deputy Assistant Director for Renewal Resources and Planning in the Bureau of Land Management in Washington, D.C. He has a tremendous career background beginning in St. George, Utah. He's worked in Montana, Colorado, Nevada, Idaho, has been a legislative fellow for the BLM, and we very much appreciate having Bud Cribley with us today. All yours.
One of my biggest fears with this presentation is that I don't have a hard copy of the PowerPoint. I was going to have to read it off the screen, but they've set me up here so I don't look too obvious from the standpoint of reading my presentation. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank the Society and the folks who came up with the idea of providing this forum for the agencies to express some of the issues that we're dealing with right now. We're living, I think, as everybody understands and sees, who are particularly dealing with public land management in very changing and dynamic and very fast times. And trying to keep up with that is a very big challenge for everybody. So I think these types of forums where we can present these ideas and create the thinking and the discussion about what those issues are and what we can do to try to deal with those. We're not going to stop them. We're not going to get in front of them. We're not going to go back to the way it was. We're going to have to figure out with the tools that we have and new tools that we need to deal with those issues, and these are the places that we can do that. And that's one of the things that the Society for Range Management provides for us. So it's a very important forum from my perspective of being able to talk about these things and what we're dealing with on the country's public rangelands that the Bureau is responsible for. The Bureau is the largest public land manager of the federal agencies. I think the latest count, it's changing every day, but it's right around 260 million acres of public lands. Vast majority of those are rangelands located out in the western states and also including vast acreages of land up in Alaska. We have a lot of issues that we're facing. We always have had a very diverse plate of issues that we have to deal with, but the challenges are becoming intensified for us. The three that I wanted to talk about with you today that are our biggest issues and are going to continue to grow for us are fire, noxious weeds, and the development pressures that we see coming forth because of the growing populations and the demands of those populations in the western states on our public lands. How do we, oh, okay. So where do I point this? Now we have to go through training. Train. Get credit. Somehow or another I should get credit for this. The first issue I wanted to talk about, and one that is very big for us, and it's also big for the country, not only from the standpoint of how it's affecting our public land resources, but also something that's affecting us from a budget standpoint, and something that is a growing concern and is costing federal government larger and larger amounts of its dollar resources, and that has to do with fire and what fire is doing for us. A lot of what we're seeing right now and what we're dealing with on public range or BLM rangelands can be tied back directly or indirectly to the some effects of climate change. We're seeing through the fire, because of climate change and such, we're seeing altered fire regimes. We're seeing, because of climate change, drought, which is affecting those fire regimes and the occurrence and the size and the severity of those fires. And as a result of all of that, we're seeing vegetation changes and our abilities to rehab. The issues that we're dealing with right now is probably best exemplified in the Great Basin area, regions of the West, where we're seeing a lot of our sagebrush habitats through the drought cycles are converting over through fire to annual range or grasslands invaded by primarily cheatgrass. One of the challenges that we're having is a lot of these conversion and type conversion that's taking place is on very large, vast acreages, and our abilities to rehab those areas are very limited. Part of the limitation or the controlling of that is financial, or just having the budget to be able to do that and do that effectively. But the other challenge that we're facing right now is the fact that because of the drought cycles, our abilities to rehab those areas is very limited. The species, the grass species that we have to come in and recover those areas are limited, and in many cases, a lot of those areas that are burning right now, we don't have the science or the capacity to go in and recover those areas. So we're losing vast acreages right now to this burning cycle, and it's a cycle that we're getting into, and it's reoccurring, which is kind of a domino effect from the standpoint that the fires get larger, and the larger they get, the more cheatgrass that you have. You get into the drought cycles, and they just continues. And with a limited ability of controlling or limiting the degree of that fire cycle. The Bureau is making extensive efforts at trying to rehab those areas, but like I say, with the limited dollars, you can only affect change on so many acres, and the success of that is so dependent on our moisture, and if you're in drought cycles, that recovery is very difficult. The other problem that we're dealing with is this is only an example or probably a precursor of what's happening all across the West in our western rangelands. And one of the fears that we have coming down the road and in the future is this is not going to be limited or restricted just to the Great Basin. We're already seeing this same type of type conversion happening down in the Southwest in the Mojave and Sonoran deserts. A couple of years ago, we had some very good rains in spring and had extensive fires down in Arizona, southern Nevada, and lost vast acreages of our desert habitats. And we have a new species, it's not cheatgrass, but it's red brome, that is coming in and acting and taking over those sites the same as cheatgrass has up in the Great Basin. And we're starting and getting into that same cycle. And the challenges that we have is those are desert habitats. And those are extremely difficult to recover, particularly when you have the seed sources of the invasive species in there that are dominating those sites. And because we have not done a lot of rehab work in the past, we have extensive or we have limited seed sources of species that we can come back into and effectively recover those sites. And it's occurring in that area, and it's just probably if our climate change trends continue, the drought cycles continue, I think it can be reasonably anticipated that this is going to move farther over into the Wyoming and Colorado and Montana areas. Logically, I think that progression could be drawn. And that's going to be another challenge for us, is trying to get in front of those fire cycles and try to prevent that from coming in there, learning from what we have and what limited information we have out of the Great Basin and Southwest. But that's one of our big challenges. The next challenge that we're dealing with, and it's related, and all of these challenges are all interrelated, is noxious weeds. Noxious weeds is a tremendous challenge for the Bureau and all of the agencies, private lands, everywhere. We're dealing with, right now, over 35 million acres of invested rangelands with invasive and noxious weeds. We've got 20 million acres of non-native annual grasses right now, and that's part of that fire cycle. It's contributing to that significantly. We're losing about 24,000 acres a day to invasive species, And it's not just the traditional ones. Every day a new species is being identified to us that we're having to deal with, whether they're coming in to the country, and they seem to be taking hold and affecting those rangelands and how we manage those rangelands. A lot of the problem that we're dealing with here in this particular situation is dealing with it's not just a fire issue, it's surface disturbance, which creates those footholds for those invasive species to come into those sites. And it's one of those situations that everybody participates or contributes to that situation, all of the activities on public lands. It's not just livestock grazing, it's recreational use, it's energy development, it's road building. It's a lot of the challenges are coming in from the urbanization or the development of private lands intermingled in our rangelands, where they're coming in and making those surface disturbances and causing those footholds for invasive species to come into it. And a lot of that, because of the scope of it and the size of it, we don't have the resources to stay on top of it and control those weeds and the invasion of those weeds. They get that foothold in those surface disturbances and then start moving out into our rangeland resources. So this is a big problem. And this kind of goes back to this leads into the next issue. A big problem or significant issue that we're looking at and dealing with is development and development pressures. The populations out west are growing, and they are continuing to grow. One of the challenges of managing BLM lands is that those lands are intermingled lands. Most of BLM lands are not in large blocks, but they're intermingled with other ownership pattern with other owners, such as private landowners, other agencies, state governments, federal or county governments and such. And it's a very difficult land pattern to manage, which you can, in managing blocks of land, you have certain degrees of control in dealing with invasive species and fire, but in broken land patterns like that, not everybody always plays on the same level, which creates a challenge in pulling everybody together, creating the partnerships necessary to correct those or deal with those management issues. With the increasing population, a lot of the public lands that we manage are very close to urban areas. And as those urban areas are growing, there's more people and they're looking to get out of their urban areas and move out onto public lands and recreate. And that is a significant impact on public lands right now, is that unmanaged recreational use or casual use on public lands, whether it be from RVs going out or off-road vehicles, whatever that may be. Those disturbances, where in the past were never at a level that it was significant or a serious problem for us, they're occurring at an astronomical rate and increasing at an astronomical rate, causing significant impacts on public lands. When I first started with the Bureau of Land Management, when we were doing land use plans, the idea of going into the local communities and talking about putting restrictions on off-road use was almost, well, you didn't do that and survive or live in the community with the folks that you were working with. These days, the communities are coming to the Bureau asking us, how are we going to limit this use or control this uncontrolled recreational use on public lands because of the impacts. It's not just impacts on public lands, but it's also the adjacent private lands and other agency lands that are being impacted by this use. We also have, as we're all aware, the increased demand for energy and the development, exploration and development of energy. That is a reality that we are all facing or all having to deal with and are going to have to contribute to try to override that problem, or not override it, but try to mitigate it from the standpoint of our foreign dependence on energy from outside this country. We have vast energy resources on public lands, and we're seeing development at scales and at intensities that we have never dealt with before. And rather than just having small fields of development, we have entire landscapes that are being disrupted because of this energy development, which is creating tremendous challenges for the agency right now in trying to mitigate those impacts and to also restore those lands once they are out of production. This is a very intensive and very sensitive issue for the agency right now, and one that there's a lot of energy going into to figure out how to deal with that. One of the good things that's happening, or very encouraging things, is that everybody, I think, whether it be from industry, other government agencies, and the Bureau, are recognizing these impacts and also recognizing that it's going to continue. And so we're working together in a collaborative effort to try to understand how we can better develop those resources and minimize our impact or our footprint on the public lands. And those are some of the pressing issues that we've got. These are just three of the pressing issues. And like I say, all of those issues are interdependent. Fire cycles and what we're dealing with there are interdependent with the invasives, or interrelated with invasive species, and also with the developments taking place and the opportunities for fires to occur and such. So it's a problem that we're facing, but we've had, because of the collaboration and the partnerships with the public land users, we're working on those problems on a day-to-day basis. One of the initiatives that we've got going on right now trying to deal with these issues is the Healthy Lands Initiative. This is an initiative that was started or brought forth last year and is being funded this year and will continue to be funded in future budgets. The primary purpose of this is to improve the health and productivity of the public lands in the key areas of today's West, protecting the quality of life of Westerners, and that quality of life that they have come to expect, and then also ensuring the economic well-being and energy security of all Americans. This is a secretarial initiative that all of the agencies within Interior are participating in. The Bureau, because of its land base and because of the issues we're dealing with, are a primary focus for this initiative. A lot of people, as this was initially started, this was a budget initiative looking for funds to help us deal and manage landscapes. But the current director, Jim Caswell, and the secretary, Dirk Kempthorne, are trying to expand that to how BLM does business in managing its lands, and not just looking at lands on a permitting by permitting basis, whether it be a livestock grazing allotment or an oil and gas field development, but rather than looking at entire landscapes and how our authorizations on that landscape affects that landscape, and trying to come up or develop management plans and also mitigation strategies that can offset those impacts so that the entire landscape can remain productive. And if we're losing productivity in one portion of that, we can look to protect other areas in other parts to try to maintain the integrity of those landscapes. This is a very important initiative for the Secretary, and something that he is driven by, our director is driven by, and that consequently they're driving the agency and the personnel in the agency to try to integrate that into how we do business. We've got a year to do it, and we're busy right now. So. But it just adds to the excitement of everything else that we're doing. But it's one of those things, an initiative from a land management agency is very positive, and from an agency standpoint, the people working on this are very excited about it and want to try to take the opportunity to try to integrate this as much as we possibly can. As far as how the societies can help us out, I think having forums like this obviously is a big starting point in having that dialogue. I think one of the things that's very important for the Bureau and the employees within the Bureau is that because of how we manage the public lands, the interest that we have in the public lands from the public, the decisions that we make are a lot more complex, and they're receiving a lot more scrutiny than we've ever had before. And that bar is being raised every day, every time we walk into a court. and the courts are driving us that way, but also the decisions are a lot more complex than we've had to do in the past, and the stakes are a lot higher, and it takes a lot better information and a higher level of analysis and a level of science and knowledge of cause and effect to be able to deal and make good decisions. The societies create the forum for identifying those needs to communicate to the research community and the universities of what types of research and information we need to help us make better decisions, and then taking that information and applying it to the ground. And also the education of our employees and maintaining the scientific capability of those employees and being able to deal with these issues and having the latest information. That's what the society does for us, and why it's very important to have our employees a member of this and participating in the society. The society can also help us with educating the public, whether it be the Congress or local publics, of what the cause and effect, what the values are of rangelands, what the true effects are of uses of those rangelands, and what the real solutions to the problems are. It's trying to take it and trying to add as much rationale and science to the answers rather than just emotionalism and politics to answers. We've been trying to and are being forced into trying to make those types of political decisions, and those are not good resource decisions, and the society helps us with that. Let's see, what else have we got? I think that as you can see, that we have some other points here about the credibility of the management documents, like I was saying, and trying to add that value to it, and keeping our professionals in this agency educated as far as what we need to know to be able to manage the public lands. I think it's very important to us, and the continued commitment to the agencies and to the agency's commitment to the society is very important. It's a very relational relationship that we have, and we need to continue that. And I know from a management standpoint, management within the Bureau, the leadership in the Bureau supports that and is trying to make that made aware to the employees and encouraging them to participate in the societies, whether it be the Society for Range Management or any of the other professional societies. I think that's what I can do for you for right now.